Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. Today we're starting a new unit. So this unit is the American Cultural Revolution. I call it that because everything that America had typically done starts changing in the 1950s. So this unit is going to go through the 1950s, the 1960s, into the 70s, really end around 1980. There's a cultural revolution. Everything really gets upended in this time period, and everything is done in a new format. A bunch of wild stories to talk about today. Let's go ahead and get started. So while there are tons of stories that's going to take place between the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, this particular picture right here is actually going to take place during the Vietnam War, but I feel like it encompasses America at the time. You have the old way of doing stuff, that you have the military, the police here. You have civilians on the left side, and the civilians are offering the flower. That's not what's supposed to happen. It's such a captivating picture here of, make love, not war. This mentality, we'll talk about the cultural changes at the time period. But while this kind of embraces this entire time period of change and viewing traditional things in new ways, it spreads the gamut of American society. So today we're going to specifically talk about the post-war boom. All right. This picture here, just looking for a random picture of the 1950s. This is a screenshot of a movie, Rebel Without a Cause. The guy behind me, who is classically handsome, that is a guy named James Dean. Prior to this, movie stars, they could look different way, like usually older guys with a little pencil mustache. Once James Dean goes on the screen, and he's going to die tragically of a young age, does about 6 movies. James Dean has that look that everybody wanted on movies, so James Dean kind of becomes the prototype of what movie stars are supposed to look like for the next up to present day, because it kind of comes out in the 1950s. We're going to talk about Hollywood again here in a little bit, because movies and TV change society drastically. We're going to talk about that today. But before we get there, let's talk about the family of the 40s and 50s. So this is something huge. I'm going to give you kind of a specific story here, but this story was wildly accepted across America. Millions of people had the same story. All right. So we'll talk about Billy and Sally here. So Billy and Sally are in a high school class together. All right. And they just started dating, and they've been dating for a couple months. And they're seniors in high school, and then Pearl Harbor happens, all right? And America goes to war in World War II. Well, Billy, all right, because he's an 18-year-old male in the United States, is required to register for the draft. He registers for the draft, and then Billy gets drafted. He has to go off to war in World War II. So Billy does something that might seem a little odd to you, but Billy, along with millions of other men, do the same thing right before they go off to war. Right before Billy goes off to war, he goes to Sally. Now, he's known Sally for months, all right? And Billy and Sally get married. As crazy as that is, tons of men turn around and marry girlfriends before they go off to war. This might seem crazy to you. Why would they do that? Maybe they wanted a honeymoon before they went off to war. Maybe that played into it, but there's a logistical reason for that. There's a financial reason. You get paid more if you're married in the military. So all these men turn around and they get married, and then they get shipped off to war, and they're going to be gone over in Europe for like 4 years, right? They're not going to see another human, and so they're going to go over there, and they're going to win, all right? Not only are they gone for 4 years, and they win there in World War II, these guys were getting paid well, relatively speaking, and they had nothing to spend their money on. So their wives would stay at home with their parents while the men go off to war for 4 years, all right? And then the men return. This is an actual picture of soldiers coming back from Europe. These are herds of men, just absolutely massive herds of men. So these men, when they get back, they're all married, all right? So they have money, They're married. They haven't seen a female in years. The women haven't seen a male in years. Human nature starts taking over. They're already married, already whatever that. They need houses. They need places to stay because they're not staying at her parents' house. And keep in mind, when they left, it was the Great Depression. So there's not like there's tons of houses anyway. So there's this desperate need for houses for everybody. Enter this dude, William Levitt. William Levitt realized there was a need for tons of houses, and the soldiers had money to be able to pay for the houses. So he basically designed how you make like one house, and instead of just individually making houses how it had been done, you design one house and then you mass produce it. So William Levitt is responsible for what were called Levitt towns. All these houses are the same, just mass produced. It makes them cheaper like this. Now, to mass produce them, you can't be in the heart of the city. You have to be kind of city adjacent. And they would just plow down a big field and make as many of these houses as possible. This is called the suburbs. You're not really like in the middle of the country, but you're also like not walking distance to work. So in order to live here in the suburbs, all right, which all the Billies and Sallys would buy a house here in the suburbs, you also had to have a car. Well, cars in the 1950s were a lot cheaper too. Look at that list there. That's how much cars cost in the 1950s. Now, I'm pretty sure that's probably a used car lot, but still, a fully functioning car, you can buy it for $125. Or you can further down that list. You can buy a 1950 Ford half-ton for less than $1,000. So everybody would buy cars. Everybody lived in the suburbs. Everybody, it's a figure of speech. On top of this, so many people had cars, and Dwight Eisenhower, who will be the president that we'll talk about here in a second, realizes, all these cars, this is a good time to build what is current day our interstate highway system. So the interstate highway system basically stretches north and south and east to west across the United States. If you've never thought about it, you can tell the numbers, 5, 10, or 5, 15, 25, 35, 45, they go in order across the country like that, if you've never thought about it. This is actually for military. Basically, if we get attacked somewhere in our country, we can get our military from one side of the country to the other very quickly, north and south here, or east and west, like I-40 goes from Wilmington, North Carolina, all the way out to California without a single stoplight. This was designed for the military. But because everybody's driving cars, we have the roads, we have the infrastructure, people have houses, they have money, they have cars, because again, these men were getting paid for entire 4 years in the war. And this dude, who you may have never heard of, and it's crazy. If we talk about Adolf Hitler, like, oh, that's the guy that killed all the people in the Holocaust, and he's famous for being evil. This man saved more lives throughout history than Hitler took. And you probably never heard of Dr. Jonas Salk. But Dr. Jonas Salk created the polio vaccine. Basically eradicated polio. This is what FDR got it twice and died of complications from it the second time. Polio was ravaged societies. We don't have it anymore thanks to this dude. Not only is polio eradicated, modern medicine has drastically improved overwhelmingly. So let's recap here, because what I'm getting ready to tell you is crazy important for this course. People have money. They have space. They have medicine. All right? They're young, they're married, and they ain't seen each other in a long time. This is going to lead to something in the 1950s called the baby boom. Herds of babies everywhere. There's tons of pictures to show you just a bunch of babies. Tons and tons of babies get born in the 1950s. They're called the baby boom generation, referred to as boomers. All right. So the birth rate, all right, skyrockets after World War II. This is not really uncommon around the world. This happens a lot of places around the world. Japan, the UK. The birth rate spikes. The big reason is because babies aren't dying, as crazy as that is. That's one of the modern medicine. But the idea of having as many kids as you could afford was just the common practice. Not only would you have the kids were all healthy and live full lives because of modern medicine that had really made massive gains in World War II. If you have any grandparents, great-grandparents, anybody that was born in the 1950s, they probably had at least 4 siblings because that was expected. The population is huge of babies in the 1950s. The reason that's so important in this course is because the baby boom population is the largest part of the population. When they turn 10 years old in the 1960s, the largest part of the population is 10-year-olds. When they turn teenagers in the late 60s, the largest part of the population are the hippies. And that is up to present day. The largest part of the population present day is still, and they're all hitting retirement age at the time of this recording, is still the people that were born in World War II. So really the rest of this course is going to focus very heavily among that population because it is the largest part of the population is the people that were born right after World War II. So the question here is, explain some of the economic, medical, and societal reasons why there were so many kids born in the 1950s and 60s. Pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, so life in the 1950s, there's a couple really important things that come out that I want to talk about. One of them was the amount of inventions that came out that helped women. So men were expected to be the provider. They go to work, they make money, they come home, they give the wife the money, and they're done. Like that is how men's only value in society is based on how well they can provide for their family. Saw that in the Great Depression. That same mentality still exists. Women's expectation in society was how well you raise your kids, which involves taking care of all the insane housework. Laundry alone would take hours and hours and hours with washboards and doing dishes, doing everything by hand. Mowing the yard was expected to be a woman's job. Little hand push mowers that were like with no motor, it was really difficult. In the 1950s, new inventions come out, like the washer and dryer. This drastically cut down on the amount of time women had to spend doing laundry. Other inventions, the dishwasher. This will automatically clean all your dishes for you. The motor-powered push mower, all right? All of these things made life easier and faster for women. Women, due to these inventions, and here's some advertisement, which literally washer and dryers could be more expensive than a car at the time. But women have more time now, and you're going to start seeing in the 1950s, women start getting involved in their communities, the feminist movement's going to start coming out, women start advocating politically because of these inventions that come out that allow women to work, 70 hours a week instead of 120 hours a week, kind of thing, being a stay-at-home mom, because if you've met any stay-at-home moms, it's not an easy job. All right. There's a very specific, I'll tell you this story because I really like it, and it helps explain a lot of things that we'll talk about in this unit. Television comes out in the 1950s, and it is a game changer. Basically, by the end of the 1950s, nobody watches or listens to radio instead of watches TV. TV takes the world by storm when it becomes available in the 50s. That is the new standard bearer. So everybody watched TV shows. Now, TV shows were generally done live. There's video cameras on the set, and they'll do their show live. It is streamed directly to the TV. If you mess up, you just go on about it. It's fine. When it is over, it's done. And nobody ever gets to watch it again because it was live. I Love Lucy is a very famous show of the 1950s, and it was not the most famous show of the 1950s. It was one of them. However, you probably may have seen I Love Lucy. The reason I Love Lucy is different is because there's a lot of racial tension in the United States at the time, which we will talk about tomorrow. So when Lucille Ball here gets this show, she wants to do the show with her real life husband. All right. However, her real life husband, right here, the character is Ricky Ricardo. Desi Arnaz is his real name. So Desi Arnaz is her husband in real life. He is Cuban. All right. they didn't think, the networks didn't want them on TV because they didn't think the Americans would accept an interracial marriage. Like, that's how intense America is at the time. So she says she won't do it without him as her husband. So they allow her to do this show. But the stipulation is that they have to pre-record the show so the producers can watch it first so that they can make sure there's nothing inappropriate that would upset America with this interracial marriage before they put it on TV. Like, literally, when it showed their bedrooms, they had 2 beds in their bedroom. Like, they wanted to make sure nobody could get upset about this. But what's interesting about this is because they had to pre-record all of her shows in advance, this allows for reruns, and they realized all these other great shows, they should have been doing the same thing so they could show it a second time and make money off of it a second time, but they don't. But I Love Lucy, that's the reason we have these high quality footage of all those episodes and not a lot of the other episodes from the 1950s. But television hits the market with a vengeance, and everybody's watching TV at this point. So the question here is, how did innovations during the 1950s that were focused towards women help women have a larger role in American society? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. So let's talk about some politics right here. So in 1948, Harry Truman runs for re-election. Kind of surprisingly, it doesn't look like he's going to win. He was not very popular at the time. Very similar to why Winston Churchill didn't get re-election after World War II. Truman, he did his thing, but people were ready to move on and have a peacetime president, so he wasn't super popular. He was not expected to win. He was supposed to lose to this guy named Dewey. They were so confident that Dewey was going to win, they actually print the newspapers the night before the election that said Dewey defeats Truman. All the newspaper people go to bed. In a true surprise, Truman wins the popular vote and wins the most states, and Truman wins the election. And this is a very famous picture of him holding up the newspaper that says Dewey defeats Truman, even though Truman defeated Dewey, and the newspapers had printed it out too early. So Truman is the president there through the Korean War. In 1952, Dwight Eisenhower, who's nicknamed Ike, wins in a landslide. So Dwight Eisenhower, being the supreme Allied commander in World War II, not surprisingly, had a lot of name recognition. He's kind of the general that's accredited with, winning World War II. So he runs for president in 1952, and he's going to win. His vice president, as you can see him pictured here, is a young guy named Richard Nixon, which we're going to talk more about later on in this unit. But so he wins in 1952. Well, society's going to change pretty quickly. This is the Cultural Revolution of this unit. A new bomb is invented called the hydrogen bomb. The hydrogen bomb is wildly bigger than the stuff dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For example, those little trees? No, that is the size of the mushroom clouds from Hiroshima and Nagasaki there on the left side. That mountain, that's Mount Everest, to give you an idea of how big this is. We developed the hydrogen bomb, 67 times more powerful than the atomic bombs, just a few years later. We develop it, and then Russia develops it right after us. These have never been used in combat or in war. World War II is the only time it's ever been done. Eisenhower, really starts freaking people out because he's the president when we get the hydrogen bomb, and Eisenhower keeps threatening to use it on everybody, and it really freaks him out. It's called brinkmanship, and this is comes from this cartoon here, actually. This is John Foster Dulles, the guy supposedly pushing Uncle Sam over the brink of nuclear war, because anytime we have a problem with another country, we threaten to go to the brink of nuclear war. It's called brinkmanship. Terrifies America, because if we launch nukes on Russia, Russia launches nukes on us, World War III, we all die. Like we talked about that in the last unit of the Berlin airlift. Everybody is terrified, and now we have these crazy nukes that can do crazy different stuff with the hydrogen bomb. So the United States, we implement this stuff in schools called duck and cover drills. And we have this little cartoon with Bert the Turtle. It tells everybody to duck and cover. All right. You may have heard about this, where kids would get under their desk and prepare in case they're hit with a nuclear bomb. And you might laugh and say, how stupid is that? Now, I want to clarify for you, they did have these bomb drills in the 1950s, which symbolizes how terrified people are of when is the nuclear holocaust going to happen. Nobody in their right mind believes a desk is going to stop you from a nuclear bomb. All right? Nobody believes that. The reason they do this is because kids just want to be kids, and they're constantly being terrified of when are we going to get nuked here in World War III. So they do these drills in school to tell the kids, hey, if you get under your desk, you're safe from atomic bombs, and the kids believe this. So the kids can go about their normal life not afraid of getting blown up with an atomic bomb because, hey, I can just get under the desk. Whereas if the actual bomb goes off, everything just gets disintegrated, and it's over. So they didn't do this for like adults or high school kids. They did this for kids so they can have a normal childhood and didn't have to live in trauma, terrified of when the hydrogen bombs are going to drop on them. So the question here is, explain why young students would practice hiding under their desk during the 1950s in case of nuclear attacks. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. So, as it's definitely not all sunshine and rainbows here in the 1950s, there is also this whole thing that happens in the 1950s called the Red Scare. So communism gets a color. It's called red. And America is terrified that communists, because that's what Russia is, communists are trying to take over America. Now, is there any logic or like actual anything based on this? No. But just like Japanese Americans during World War II got rounded up and put in prison camps, America's fear of things makes us do stuff that violate constitutional practices. And the Red Scare is America becomes terrified there's going to be a hostile communist takeover. And we create a group here called the House of Un-American Activities Committee. House of Un-American Activities Committee's goal is to find all these crazy communists and bring them to justice. All right. So, spoiler alert: they're not going to find any. The House of Un-American Activities Committee finds nothing, but they ruin a bunch of people's careers. So what happens is that the House of Un-American Activities Committee thinks you might be a communist. You have to come here and with all of these video cameras and you're on live TV and have to explain to people why you are not a communist. When they ask you 1,000 times, why are you a communist? And you're like, I'm not a communist. I don't know what you're talking about. All people associate you with after the hours-long video of you saying, I'm not a communist, I'm not a communist, I'm not a communist, is the word communist. And you'll never be hired again. You'll be blacklisted. Now, the House of Un-American Activities Committee doesn't just randomly pick random groups throughout America to go pick on. It's one particular group that they go after, and it's Hollywood, the movies. The House of Un-American Activities Committee becomes convinced that Hollywood actors and directors and producers are trying to corrupt the youth of society by making communist movies. They're not, all right? But doesn't stop people in Hollywood from being accused of this. So if you're accused of being a communist, you have to fly all the way out to Washington, D.C., have one of these meetings right here where you are trying to convince the country you are not a communist. But when you have to say communist 1,000 times, it never works and your career is over. Because of this, being called out here to Washington, D.C. to defend yourself, all right, against something that technically isn't even illegal, like being a communist, all right, because freedom of speech, you can absolutely call this unconstitutional, that they are, anyway. So there are famously 10 Hollywood guys that are like not doing it. And it's the Hollywood 10. They say, come out here and defend yourself. And they are subpoenaed, which means they're required by law to show up. They say, not going to do it. Well, when they refuse to show up, that's breaking the subpoena. They're arrested and sent to jail for contempt, for not showing up, for not following the rules. And all America knows is 10 people that were accused of being communists got sent to jail. Well, now granted, they went to jail because they refused to go to this kangaroo court and defend themselves. But when they go to jail for like 30 days, America's like, oh, see, that's why we need a House of Un-American Activities Committee. We're catching criminals. Even though the House of Un-American Activities Committee actually made them the criminals by subpoenaing them for something that wasn't even illegal. This is a very famous cartoon that is used all the time. Hint, hint, nod, nod for your test. And it does a really good job of explaining what is taking place. The Committee on Un-American Activities, all right, the HUAC here, House of Un-American Activities Committee, is basically saying, it doesn't matter how many innocent people were, they're driving up on the sidewalk, we're hurting people, all these innocent people, there's no remorse, there's no concern, because as long as we're hunting communists, the ends justify the means. It's fine. Now, they never actually catch any communists here in the cartoon either. So there is people's lives and livelihoods that get blacklisted. Nobody will hire them because they're associated with communists. Tons of people lose everything here with this witch hunt, which is the Red Scare. So the question here is, why do you think Americans generally accepted the violation of constitutional rights of civilians by the House of Un-American Activities Committee while looking for communists? Because they were allowed to do this. Like, nobody stood up and said no. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. So we do actually catch a spy. And it freaks everybody out. In 1950, we catch this guy, Alger Hiss. Works for the State Department. He was a spy. He was giving stuff to Russia. However, this was like before World War II, and the statute of limitations has passed. So when they put him on trial, while he can't go to jail for being a spy anymore, they're like, were you a spy? And he's like, no. And they're like, can prove that he was. So he has perjured himself. He lied under oath. So he goes to jail for like whatever the maximum time is, like a year or two, I think. But once we actually catch one spy, it exacerbates this situation, and everybody thinks there's spies everywhere. The next situation is this husband and wife. So when Russia gets nukes and then the hydrogen bomb, instead of America saying, hey, Russia might be smart too, we think the only possible way that they could possibly have gotten the nuclear secrets is if an American gave it to them. Because honestly, the logic here of this court case is the belief that since you're an American, you know how to make nuclear bombs. You don't. These are not highly educated husband and wife. They are in the Communist Party, though. So when they're looking for a scapegoat, somebody to blame for who could have given Russians the nuclear secrets, they arrest Ethel and Julius Rosenberg for being in the Communist Party. And when they interrogate them, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg say stuff like, oh, we didn't give them the nuclear secrets, but if we had them, we would have. Like, that doesn't help your case. They clearly did not do this. I mean, they couldn't have the ability. Doesn't stop us, meaning America, from executing this husband and wife via electric chair for giving nuclear secrets to Russia. America just throws out a lot of our constitutional protections here out of fear of communism, just like we threw out Japanese Americans' constitutional rights out of fear of the fact that they're Japanese. Some guys found a way to make a living off of that fear. Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy was just a no-name senator and just hops up one day in the middle of the Senate. It's like, oh my gosh, there's about to be a hostile communist takeover of our government. And he pulls up a piece of paper, and I have a list of names right here that prove it. Nobody says, I wonder if that's true. They say, oh my gosh, let's all panic. The communists are going to take over. He gets a ton of power just because he says he knows that there's who these communists are. They're elected officials, all this other stuff. Always says he's going to name names on his piece of paper. That piece of paper is blank. He's a big fat liar. But he gets more and more power. Everybody look at it. He starts winning re-elections. He goes so big, he starts like pointing out places, oh, here's where the communists are. Like, he's just making this stuff up. All right. None of this is legitimate. But he's using fear for political gain. As long as people are afraid, they support him. It's not until, as he gets more and more power, he wants to control the military. Not making that up. That's crazy. And the military's like, no. So he's like, well, you must be communist. Because that's what he would say. He'd call people communist if they said no to him. Well, when he calls the military communist, because all y'all dress the same, they basically go and snatch that piece of paper out of his hand and be like, he's lying. And very quickly, once he gets called out on it, Joseph McCarthy's gets censured by the Senate, and he is like shamed out of office. But he has run stuff in the Senate throughout most of the 50s for years. And it was so horrifying to think back on the fact that this man just out of lies and fear gained all this power. The term McCarthyism actually is coined using his last name, is when politicians use fear for political gain. So the question here is, explain how Joseph McCarthy was able to come to power, how he was able to hold on to it, and what we see, what we as a society can learn from that situation. So answer that completely. See you guys tomorrow.